All right. Well, welcome to episode 5 of the Uncomfortable Conversations podcast, the untold stories of the 3HO Kundalini Yoga community. I'm your host, Guru Nishan. And before I introduce our guest for today, who is also born and raised in the 3HO community, like myself, I want to share with you the intentions for why I've started this podcast. There are 11 intentions, and it is organic, so they may change along the way. Number 1, to break the veil of silence that has long permeated and continues to strangle the 3HO Kundalini Yoga community in the name of neutrality. Number 2, to validate and help clarify the complex feelings of those who joined this lifestyle, were born and raised into it, and/or have practiced or taught Kundalini Yoga. Number 3, to encourage active listening to uncomfortable conversations from our community as a revolutionary act of self and collective healing. Number 4, to let survivors know that we see them, we believe them, we love them, and we will fight for their truth to be addressed. Number 5, to let teachers who are denying, gaslighting, or spiritually bypassing know that what they are doing is willfully ignorant and re-traumatizing victims. Number 6, to illuminate the inherent racism, homophobia, cultural misappropriation, and exploitation that perpetuates the teachings, 3HO lifestyle, and overall community ethos. Number 7, to stop the perpetuation of gaslighting and victim shaming by naming it for what it is. Number 8, to dismantle internalized shame, guilt, toxic positivity, and light washing mentality. Number 9, to honor all of the parts of ourselves that have been forgotten or silenced. Number 10, to honor every body that has come through our community, both named and unnamed. And number 11, to encourage people to do their own research, process their own emotions, get somatic therapy and other support as needed, to draw your own conclusions, and to be critical thinkers rather than just blindly follow anyone. Please remember that your story matters. Please share it when you're ready. We're here to listen and support you. So today I want to introduce to you our special guest for episode 5. His name is Dharam Khalsa Lietz. I hope I said your last name right. Geez, I didn't even ask you that. He's married to Wahe Guru Lietz from Austria, who they live in Portland, Oregon, and he's a software engineer for Postmates. He lives with his 2 tabby boys, which I learned are his cats. And they're 7 months pregnant with their first baby boy. He grew up in 3HO and went to school in India for 10 years, and he still considers himself a Sikh and part of the 3HO community. 2020 has been a transformational year, to say the least, and in many ways has paved the way for him to be more authentic, as he's put it for himself. So without further ado, I wanted to welcome Dharam. Thank you so much for being a part of our podcast today.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Thank you. Your voice has really rang loudly for me. I missed you actually sharing your story on the Zoom earlier this year, but you have been vocal and active in sharing your process. And I just wanted to start by saying, why do you feel it's important to speak out and share your story?
Well, those 11 intentions definitely spoke to me. I feel like that sums up everything that I see as sort of wrong with or needing to change in our community. And so, yeah, you put it very succinctly and clearly. I'm really appreciating those intentions. I think for me, just this feeling of like sort of family or community, or especially with kids that I went to MPA or India, India kids, there's this really strong bond there that is, perhaps stronger than family by blood. I feel like I would just drop anything to help them and do anything for them, and many of them would do the same for me. And so that bond, that connection is so important to me. And
Yeah.
I feel just like in light of everything that we're sort of realizing about how we grew up, that is just so important to like face it all with integrity and sort of go through the whole process understanding ourselves that way. And I don't know, trying to be a voice of reason or a voice of truth in some way that I can.
Yeah. Thank you. I think it's so apropos that a lot of our generation, and you're younger than me, so it's like when we say second gen, there's like 5 generations of kids, and we're all just kind of lumped into the born and raised group, um, but that we're approaching this like with, taking kind of the light of our truth, the light of kind of like what we heard, the Satnam, like what does it mean to live truth, and how do we shine this light and truth into some of these darkest shadows that are obviously so much a part of our upbringing, as much as the bonds and the connections and the community and the history. So thank you. I think that your generation, our generation, is doing a lot in this arena for our community.
Yeah, there's definitely, I mean, I wrote a few poems about shadow this year, and like I've read many, and it's just like, yeah, wow, in such a big way. We're sort of seeing and recognizing and addressing the shadow of our community, of our history.
Yeah. Well, why don't you take us back, give us some history, some context in terms of like when you were born, age group, and then, some story around what happened in your life. What's been your experience?
Yeah, so I was born 1986 in January in Brooklyn, New York. There was an ashram on Bergen Street, and my father, Sri Vishnu, and my birth mom, Wahe Guru, they were living in that ashram. They had been married for a few years. I was the only child that they had together. Um, we moved, they bought a house on Wyckoff Street that became sort of like an additional semi-ashram. And my dad was working with Gurdon for the construction business they had in New York, Nonix Construction. And my mom was, doing things around the house, making music. And yeah, they were living that 3HO ashram life, every day, yogi tea, sadhana at 3 a.m. and the intensity of that. So that was the first couple years of my life. When I was 3 years old, um, there was like yeah, I'm actually unclear if my mom cheated on my dad. That was the story that I was told. And she recently denied that happened, but it's kind of unclear to me. So I'm still getting clarity on that. But in any case, there was a rift in their marriage, and they went to Yogi Bhajan. And Yogi Bhajan had kind of been lobbying for my mom to come sort of become a secretary of his for like even before they were married, for many years. And so at that point, Yogi Bhajan was like, all right, there's nothing you can do to fix this marriage. Why Dukar, you're coming with me, and Sri Vishnu, you're going to raise your son. She's done enough for him. She's not needed anymore for his raising. And so she went to Espanola and lived at the ranch. And she's written a book about those 3 years of her life from when I was 3 to when I was 6. And she, I'd been in touch with her my entire life, but she had never told me that story. I mean, she alluded to that story, and she called Yogi Bhajan a sexual predator.
Wow.
That he wasn't to be trusted, and that he wanted her for himself, but she never really explicitly said, he sexually abused me, or he, did things to me. And so, her story is very compelling and has given me a lot of closure and understanding about those few years of my life and what she was going through. Really like gave me a lot of compassion for what she's been through. She's been through a lot, and it's pretty it's pretty heart-wrenching to read her experience.
Yeah.
Because she was in a lot of pain, being separated from me and from our family and everything. So on my side of the world, though, I'm still in Brooklyn, New York, and my dad ends up Yogi Bhajan actually told him, a tall blonde lady will show up and she'll help you take care of your son and be like a sort of like pseudo wife for you in the meantime, while Wahe Guru is studying with me in Espanola. And so he kept calling Yogi Bhajan like, hey, is this the one? Saw a tall blonde today. And Yogi Bhajan's like, no, it's not that one, not that one. And then at some point, I don't know, maybe like a month into it, he's like, yeah, that's the one, And so he just starts basically dating this lady while he and my mom are still married. And nobody in Brooklyn, like the rest of the 3HO folks, none of them knew about it. So they're like, what the hell is Sir Vishnu doing? Like cheating on Wahe Guru. And Yogi Bhajan's like, oh, let them talk shit about you. It's your karma. You don't have to worry about it.
Wow.
Yeah, just the layers of like control manipulation going on is pretty, yeah, it's crazy. Anyway, she was really sweet to me, and really like a loving mom, and that was exactly what I needed. And they ended up having like a wedding, I think in Massachusetts or something. And that's like, I think my earliest memory was like them getting married. So I think it was pretty significant for me. But shortly after they got married, she just kind of lost it and got in like these huge fights with my dad and started like slapping me and just like, yeah, she just like did a full 180, which
He
really,
just a yoga student?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah. And that was hard. My dad said I told him that she was ruining my life. And so he was like, yeah, this is not working. You got to leave. And props to my dad for doing that, for actually listening to me at that age.
You're about 4 at this point?
Yeah, 4 or 5. I'm not sure. Yeah. Oof. And so, yeah, it was just me and my dad for a while. I think we kind of bonded around that time. He and I got really close, and then I turned 6. I was going to go into first grade, and I think he decided that like India would be a good place for me. Like he's been sort of trying to juggle, being a single dad, with doing sadhana and everything else and working, 28 hours a day at the construction business, and was just like, okay, like all these other families are sending their kids to GRD in India. So, my son can go there. Yogi Bhajan says it's the best way to raise your kid. And so, even though he doesn't want to go, like this is the best thing for him. And I just need to get over myself. And so he flew me out to India and was there for like, I don't know, I think like a week or two. We sort of like traveled around a little bit. And then we went to GRD, kind of got me settled in, and then got on a bus and took off. And he shared that memory with me of like, getting on a bus and looking out the window, seeing me like crying, running down the street after him. And he was like, yeah, my whole body felt like it was just breaking in half, like after everything we had been through. And
Wow.
yeah, I think I understand, why you made those decisions, but if I could change one thing, I would say I wish he had listened to his heart in that moment,
Yeah.
It was a bad decision, it was a very bad decision.
So young, had been through so much already.
Yeah. So I did first and second grade at GRD. So this was like 92 to 94. And about a month after I started school, I got a letter in the mail saying, hey, you have a new stepmom. I married Sa Kidden from LA, who's like the grunty from LA. And she's going to move to New York and she's your new stepmom. And by the way, you have a stepbrother who's at GRD. And so that was like, yeah.
Wow.
I went and like knocked on Gurmustik's door, which, you know, I was like scared shitless. I was like, you don't knock on seniors' doors. Like, that's a good way to get a beating.
So he was a senior at the time.
Yeah, he was in 12th grade, which basically meant he could just do whatever he wanted. And so, yeah, I went and knocked on his door. I was like, hey, I guess we're brothers now. And he was like making grilled cheese sandwiches in his room, which was like, yeah, that's like heaven. And he's like, yeah, it's awesome. Here, have a grilled cheese sandwich. I was like, wow, I love you, man. This is, that's like the best thing he could have ever done. You know, I quickly ran, I like stuffed it in my pocket and like quickly ran around a corner to eat it, you know, that's how it worked. Didn't want to get it stolen. Yeah, India was rough. GRD especially, you know, I got bullied a lot. And
so tell us about that. So you were just saying a few months into being in India, you're in like what, second grade?
This was first grade.
This is first grade, so you're about 5-ish? Six. And you find out you have a new stepmom, obviously a new stepbrother, and now you're in India. So now tell us a little bit about the India experience.
So there was me and two other boys and two other girls that were in my class. And the three of us boys, I mean, we were in a dorm with, I want to say like 25 or 30 Indian kids our age. And the rift between like foreigners and Indian kids was pretty strong. You know, like we just naturally gravitated to each other, we were loyal to each other. And so we would literally have brawls, like in the middle of the night, just somebody would, you know, group would just jump the other kid. And then the rest of us would have to wake up and help the other kid. Wow. I mean, like pranking each other at night. And there was a lot of like fighting and just like violence. And I don't know how long it took me to fall into step with that, but I definitely did fall into step with that. And sort of like adjusted my mentality. And yeah, I mean, there was definitely like, I have good memories of like bonding with my classmates there. I have a lot of memories of being bullied by kids, you know, 2-3 years older than me. I feel like I was sort of a bully's favorite just because I don't know, I think I was pretty innocent, you know, and naive, and I would sort of believe anything they said. My nickname was Dum Dum, you know, so they would call me that, and they had all these rhymes they made up. Yeah, and I don't think the Indian teachers, they weren't really allowed to hit us kids that were super small. But of course, you know, the seniors could do whatever. And there was like a lady staff member who was in charge of like the juniors, like the really young kids. And I feel like they were really helpful. It was like, you know, once in a while I could sort of get their help with something, but you know, there was this really strong culture of like no snitching. You know, if you got beat by a senior and you went to this staff member for help, like that'd be the end of all of your friendships and any hope you had for surviving the whole experience. So that was pretty strongly there.
It's like the unwritten culture internally, kind of like like the street culture, no snitch, or the prison culture of like, you handle this internally, you don't go to the guards. So like that had been inbred within the layers of hierarchy of kids in India.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly right. I think we called it narking rather than snitching.
Okay.
The concept was the same.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, I think that experience sort of, yeah, made me more independent, I think prematurely in many ways,
Mm.
and sort of robbed me of my innocence. Um, because over time, as that as that continued, um, I learned basically that, I couldn't get help from adults when something was wrong.
Mm.
Uh, and in second grade, I had on winter break, I was like sexually abused by a 13-year-old boy, and
Mm.
he was able to easily sort of go with the same concept and say, you know, don't tell anyone about this or I'll beat you up for the rest of the year. And it was like, I already knew that that threat was real from like the narking culture. So like, I didn't understand the difference between what he was doing and the violence that was normalized by the rest of the kids.
Mm-hmm.
I just, I didn't understand the difference. And that went on for the duration of our like winter break. I don't know if it was a week or 2 weeks in Rishikesh. And luckily, one of my classmates looked in the window one time and saw what was happening, because I hadn't told him, I hadn't told anybody. He saw what was happening and he was like, Dharam, what the hell is happening in there? Like, that's not okay. And I was like freaked out. I was like, no, don't tell anyone. He's going to beat me up for the rest of the year. Like, I don't want that. Like, just don't say anything. And he was like, no, Dharam, this is different. Like, you're not the one who's going to get beat up for the rest of the year. He's going to get beat up for the rest of the year because what he's doing is not okay.
Mm.
Nobody's okay with that. And I didn't trust him. I was like, don't say anything. Like, I probably threatened him. But he
Yeah.
did. He went to an older kid who went to my brother, and my brother knew what to do about it and told the staff members. He did. I saw that 13-year-old kid get the shit beat out of him in the middle of the field, and he like crawled to me on his hands and knees, like with blood on his face, just like apologizing. And I was just like, wow. Yeah. So yeah, that was pretty bad. I think kind of messed me up in some ways, but I'm also grateful that my classmate, Grisha,
Intervene.
yeah, that he intervened. I mean, he had the wits to know that that was different, and had he not, I think it would have changed the course of my life. Um, I think the fact that my perpetrator was brought to justice immediately, and it was publicly known that he had done something really offensive and terrible to me,
Mm.
like in some ways helped me get through that second year, because then I had this like pity card I could play. It's like, don't beat up Dudham. Like he's dealing with something heavy, like, and it doesn't mean I never got beat the rest of that year, but I definitely sort of got more nice treatment from people. And it sort of reinforced this idea that like what he had done to me was wrong, and he was brought to justice, and he was like extracted from the school and kicked out. So
And this was an American student, for clarity. This wasn't an Indian student. This was another fellow American student who was
yeah,
perpetrating on other boys.
yeah. And I later learned had a lot of his own trauma. He was adopted, had been through a lot of foster families, and um, you know, he got made fun of and bullied a lot there. So I mean, yeah, it was really just a bad environment for a young child. Let's put it lightly.
And it sounds like because you ended up with a brother, you had this ally at the senior level that, and then your friend who witnessed you. It sounds like there were some internal hierarchies that could stop it,
Yeah,
stop internal abuse in a way that probably kept going on. But if somebody didn't have the right connection to get an intervention, that stuff just kind of continued for that particular individual.
yeah, it did. If Kershabit had gone to the staff, it probably would have been dealt with, but I would have reflected differently on him. So the fact that he went to somebody a few years older than him, who then went to my brother, that was actually the right way to go about that.
Interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, that was yeah.
So this is your second year. This all happened in your first year of being there, your second year. So you're 6, 7 years old.
This is my second year, I believe. So I was 7. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you stayed in India for many years longer.
I stayed in India for the rest of that year. And then, every summer I came back, I was like, I'm not going back. Right. So like after that second year, I was like, I'm not going back. And of course I had this pity card to play. I'm like a sexual abuse victim. I'm like, I don't feel safe there. I don't want to be sexually abused again. And of course my dad's like, okay, that's a good reason. Like you can stay home. So I did third and fourth grade in the US in like public school in New York. And third grade went really great. It was like a good neighborhood, a good public school system. I was like straight A student, like top of my class, just like feeling very like supported. I was going to like karate classes and sort of like learning sort of like self-defense and sort of building my confidence physically. And I just, I think all around that year was pretty excellent. But then we moved for whatever reason. I think the school I was in only went up to third grade, I think. And so we had to move basically into the projects. Like I've heard like rap songs about the street we lived on in Brooklyn. I'm just like, this is not good. And so of course, the districting, I ended up going to a pretty bad school. And they skipped me actually to 5th grade instead of doing 4th grade. So I was with older kids who were like, the vast majority of them were like Eastern European, Black, like, and then add to that I'm weird because I'm wearing a turban. And then, I'm coming out of 3rd grade, which is like, oh, you're so good. Look at this beautiful picture you drew. It's like, that was like a shock. Yeah, that was pretty bad. A lot of bullying. It was obviously way more controlled than in India. And I was coming home every day. But even my home life got pretty bad. I think they didn't like living in the projects either. So they were fighting a lot. And yeah, that year was pretty miserable. So by the end of that year, I was like, I'm going to India. I was like, it can't be worse than this. Little did I know it ended up being way worse because this was D block. This was the first year of MPA before any school existed. They just sort of had all the kids living in town somewhere. They rented a few houses and they rented a few, got a few teachers on salary and rented out a school building nearby. And it was just utter chaos. I mean, like, yeah, comparable to Lord of the Flies. That was the year that I was like, that I compare the most to Lord of the Flies. Yes.
Whoa, give us some perspective. I've heard this,
Yeah.
but I didn't go to India. So I would really like to hear what D Block was about.
Yeah, this was, I think it was 96 to 97. And so this was, they had moved the school to Amritsar in 94, and they had 2 years of a school called Sant Singh Sukha Singh. But the kids were living separately from the India kids. So it was, they had to sort of manage their own meals and housing and stuff like that. But they were still plugged into the school system, so there was a level of sort of structure there. So that year that I came for 5th grade, because I had to redo 5th grade because I failed, was 96 to 97. And they were severely understaffed. They didn't have a school to go to. We were living, I think we started living in the Navas by the Golden Temple. And then we moved to Ranjit Avenue, which is like somewhere in Amritsar. And they rented, I think, 3 or 4 houses in an area. and we were just living in houses that they like filled with bunk beds. And there was a school nearby that was under construction that had like one of the floors completed. I don't even think it had windows, but like they were still working on it sometimes while we were there. And we just had classes there. But I mean, I think I had my report card, and it was like days of school missed, and it was like 45 or 90 or something. I mean, it's like out of 200 days of school, it was like he missed like almost half of them. It's like, I mean, there was just, they had no control. Yeah, I mean, they were severely understaffed, and the folks that were there were not the best at disciplining kids. And several times during the year, they would sort of Yogi Bhajan would send like a part of his entourage to go like whip kids into shape, and it never worked. You know, we were just too rebellious and violent. And yeah, I mean, yeah.
Well, do you feel like it was the kids being rebellious and violent, or is it that the environment, there was nothing to engage the children in the environment in and of itself? Like there had been a paved road to have this unruly, like, you know what I mean? It's easy to put it off on the kids, but really there was no structure and no environment to support the children.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, kids will sort of naturally fall into whatever their surroundings have, you know, like they're not going to sort of put themselves on track. And the lack of structure, the lack of sort of adult supervision just meant that like anything goes. I mean, we were unsupervised probably like 95% of the time. Like I specifically have a memory, which I've worked with my therapist on a lot, which is that year it was like the middle of the day on a Sunday, and I'm like super, super, super tired. Like my eyes are just like shutting. And I know that if I fall asleep within like 15, 20 minutes, I'm going to have a painful awakening, because somebody's going to be either like, you know, hitting me in the face with like, you know, a bag full of something heavy, or, you know, they just throw a blanket over you, blanket beating, you know, it's like, it was really like, there was no safe place. You know, I used to try to find hiding places just so I could like relax for a second and not worry about someone coming up from behind. So like, wow. Yeah. And actually that same classmate from first grade, or from second grade, who sort of knew what to do when that sexual abuse was happening, he actually, somehow I was like crying, and normally when a kid was crying, it was like you'd hit them and tell them to shut up. But he sort of noticed something different about how I was crying, and he was like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "I can't do this. Like, I kind of want to kill myself." I was like, "This is too painful. Like, I can't go through this anymore." Like, and he was like, "Dharam, don't do that." You know, he like took me seriously. Like I was afraid that saying that he would say like, you know, shut up, like you're not serious, or like, you know, sort of push me off. But he was like, don't do that. He's like, and don't think those thoughts. He's like, don't think those thoughts. He just said that like straight. And I was like, okay, like just feeling that like somebody cared enough to like take me seriously, and care about me enough to say something like that, I think made a big difference. And like I couldn't go tell my parents that, you know, like that was a ticket to, you know, it literally felt like your survival rested on you not telling your parents things, you know.
Help us understand that. So during all of this, there wasn't a way for you to communicate to your parents. There's no safety, that you can't rest, that there's no harbor for connection. Like there was no, what would happen if you would have talked to your parents or said something?
So if I told them something and they were in the US, obviously there's nothing they can do about it. They're too far away. And if anybody found out that I had said something, all of my peers and all the people, probably basically every other boy at the school would have, like, I would have been an outcast, just, beat the shit out of him, show him that it's not okay to reach out for help. And, the students are loyal to us, the students, the staff, the adults, the parents, they're the enemy, don't work with them, don't ask them for help, don't tell them anything. If they want anything, do the opposite, And so, yeah, my parents visited that year, and it didn't matter. It was like, what are they going to do? Like, I remember just thinking, it was like, I wish I could tell them something. I wish there was something they could do to help me. But like, my little child brain was like, there's nothing they can do. Like, no matter what, even if they go and beat up that kid who hurt me, then what? Then I'm going to stay here and they're going to leave. Like, nowhere in my mind was like, oh, I can tell my dad and he will then like extract me from the school,
Yeah. How old are you here? How many years in is this when you started having the thoughts of suicide, and Shabin's like, don't think like that, like trying to reconnect, rechange your thinking process?
I was 10 or 11.
And so in perspective, you stayed another 6 years.
Yeah.
Just so we're having context here. So yeah. It sounds like the culture in and of itself had its way of keeping it contained. And for perspective, parents are paying for this experience for you to have in India. Parents are paying the school in India for this educational experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, especially at that time, is like, I don't know what they were paying for. I mean, they were building a school, so that costs money. But I mean, reflecting on that year, it's like, how much could the cost have been, to rent 4 or 5 buildings? I rented a house in 2006 after I graduated. I was paying $100 a month in rent for a 4-bedroom house, so I don't think their rent was more than, $1,000 a month for all those houses. Plus the school, and they had to like feed kids, but I mean, the cost is like nothing,
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I was just sort of in that culture, and, eventually, I think in 6th grade, there was like a turning moment where I feel like I learned that if I just wasn't happy, that nobody could hurt me anymore. So I just sort of like stopped being joyful in order to not be vulnerable to that. And I remember actually like the thought process of like figuring that out, implementing that strategy and seeing it work, and just sort of like continuing with that for years.
Wow. I want to flag that for a moment. The preservation technique of not feeling our joy as a way to protect yourself. Like what a potent thing of survival that you created inside yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. And I mean, it got me through it, I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't figured out that formula, so yeah, I mean, it comes with a cost, like,
Yeah, tell us about that. What does your life look like during those years of realizing as long as you don't access joy, then you're protecting yourself? So what was your energy? What was your demeanor? How did you maneuver through the next 5 or 6 years?
I mean, I don't know. At some point, probably within a year of that time, I started stealing a lot. And that was something that made me feel a sense of control and agency and power.
Mm.
Being able to take something from someone and not have them know who it was. And I got somewhat good at it. Of course, I got a reputation for being a thief, which, then if anything disappeared, then I would just be beat because they assumed it was me. But many times their assumption was correct. And, but, having a lot of money, just like I had that feeling of like, oh, I have like 5,000 rupees stashed away, that gave me a sense of like excitement and power. And yeah, I even stole things that had no value to me, but they had value to somebody else.
Mm.
And I know I actually hurt a few people that way. But I'm not really sure. I mean, it's hard to fully understand like what my mentality was at that time. But I imagine I just sort of like shrunk to the side, tried to be sort of invisible in a way and not put myself out there, and yeah, I think that's pretty much how it went.
Did you turn around and become a perpetrator as you got older in the school, to where kind of what I've heard is that kind of became a natural effect as you got in an older position, that then you realized, oh, now I get to beat up on the little ones? Was that a part of a normal thing that you participated in, that everyone did because it's kind of senior rights?
No, not for me. I feel like each person sort of reacted one of two ways, which was they were either like, oh, now I get to beat on the little kids, or they were like, that hurts so much, I don't want anyone else to go through that. And I think that was more my response. Although, in all fairness, my dad reminded me of a conversation we had, which I do remember, on the phone when I was probably 15 or 16, and telling him they're not letting us beat up the juniors. And, I'm upset about that. And I remember that because what I was referring to was, at that time, like the juniors were being protected by a Khalsa High and Paramatma, and they were sort of establishing a norm where like it's not okay to beat up a little kid. Like if you're super young, if you're like below the age of 10, right? Like that's not okay. Like you seniors do whatever you want with each other, but like you're not touching these juniors, they're ours. And what ended up happening is some of those juniors would then like cuss me out and, just like really sort of antagonize me. And I would be like, I don't know how to deal with this other than to like slap them around. I'm not just like seeking them out and like grabbing them and, beating the shit out of them when they're crying. I'm like, okay, this kid is now like clowning me and I have no way to sort of like save my ego from this experience, if I can't knock him around a little bit. And there was this concept in India of taking panga, P-A-N-G-A, and it was where a junior would taunt a senior, and the senior would then sort of like playfully beat up the younger kid, but not to the point where that kid would then be like hurt and crying. It was sort of like a way for the younger kids to like play with the seniors because they didn't really have any other way to interact with them. And so, you would like call a senior names or like sort of taunt them in some way. And this was like a pattern. Actually, the kids that did this were actually respected more by the seniors. So it was sort of a weird culture thing, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But now that system was being changed. It was like, okay, this kid's taking punga, but I'm not allowed to hit him. Like, this doesn't make any sense to me. So I remember that conversation. So it's not like I never hit anyone. I definitely hurt the younger kids when I was 15 or whenever. But I wasn't their tormentor, I had several tormentors over the years, and you know, I wasn't the one just constantly yelling at them to get me something, and if they didn't do it, then they would get a beating from me. And I mostly just was like, I'll just do it myself. Like I'm not trying to be the boss here. So there's definitely emotional abuse that I brought to younger kids. Just like making fun of them and belittling them and stuff. Wasn't really my thing, but I definitely did that. And I think was probably hurtful to some of them.
It was probably, it sounds like it was so normalized, and it was a sense of exerting some sense of power and control outward when one
Yeah,
felt like they had nothing and no
right.
support system.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I think as I got into let's see, like high school age, um, you know, I think my 8th grade year, so that would have been 99 to 2000. That was also a very chaotic year. Um, the 12th grade class at that time was pretty chaotic in nature, and they sort of established a culture among the students of chaos. And the person running the school at the time was a military commandant. He was like um, he was in the Marines, and so he had like a very regimented military way of running the school,
Mm.
which was laughable to us kids and laughable to the other staff, because he tried to implement this top-down sort of power structure amongst the staff. And the staff were just like, I'm good. Like, you just do your thing. And they would sort of watch him fall on his face and laugh about it. And the end result was that the school was completely out of control. And we were living at that Mitty Pitty Academy on that land and in those buildings. So we had like that structure to go off of. But I mean, I was in the girls' dorm like probably once a week, you know, at night, for prowling around and, you know, trying to meet up with somebody and ditching into town. And it's like, I'm like 13 years old with one other 13-year-old, just going into town at like 11 p.m. at night in Amritsar to
Wow.
like to get a milkshake, you know, like not even something significant. It was just like, or we'd buy booze and get drunk or something. It's like, I don't even understand how nobody got like severely injured or kidnapped. People did get severely injured. You know, one of the kids a few years older than me was like riding on a bus and was standing up, riding on the roof of the bus, and got at night and got hit in the face with a power line.
What?
Yeah, it like knocked his teeth out and he almost fell off the bus. I mean, the fact that he's even alive is a miracle in a way.
Whoa.
Yeah, he I think he has like an implant or something now. He lost one of his canines at least, maybe two. But you know, the doctors were saying, yeah, if this had hit him anywhere else in the face, it would have fractured his skull. Like the teeth are the strongest place to get hit. So yeah, it was pretty nuts. Yeah, very chaotic. Our room that year was me and my younger it's like my best friend Hargabend from Virginia, the youngest one.
Mm.
And we were in a room with two kids who were in my class, but they were both older. And one of them was a like pretty like a pretty bad bully, sort of like love to cause kids pain kind of person.
Mm.
And so we didn't really have a say, you know, we were sort of like the leftovers stuck in that room. And that was pretty bad. You know, I think it's pretty miserable living situation, to not really have a safe place to sleep or to stay. Um, yeah, that probably made that year pretty hard. But Yeah, we would just cause mischief. Me and Hardiman would be like chasing each other around the school, sort of like trying to have fun. And yeah, there's actually some good memories that year of having fun with Hardiman and a few other kids that we would sort of do fun stuff with. We'd like stack up boxes and jump over them, or we'd like throw school chairs at each other and try to catch them when they're spinning. And we would like, uh, watch kung fu movies and then try to mimic the thing and try to like, it was all this like toughness, sort of like really active, stuff we would try to do to have fun, climb up on the roof and stuff.
It sounds like the deepest bonds in friendship and brotherhood are created in these, the depths of survival, like a when needed, like a trauma bond, and of course the depths of this connectivity. It's like it's stronger than family, because it's during these earliest formative years of safety, trust establishment, survival, and it happened among your own brothers.
Right.
It's a real complex relationship of connection and abuse, all in one mixed bag.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds right.
What I'm wondering if you can shed light on, for people that don't come from our community, I think, and even for myself, one of the things that's such a complex amalgamation here is growing up in, a yoga culture like ours, where it's talked about like heart and compassion and we're all one, and kind of like this as the ethos of the kind of the outward veneer of our community. And yet a lot of times yoga students won't understand, like, how do the kids grow up in this, like, how did this abuse, beating up, hierarchy culture get created in this larger kind of community ethos of compassion, and we're all connected? Do you have anything to shed on that?
I mean, I think being in India, so far away from our parents, from the rest of society, it was like the culture that was created there, I mean, is completely separate from any culture in like a 3HO ashram or like any Kundalini yoga class or anything like that. It's like we're living in a different world, like the culture there was established, with GNFC and like the original kids. And then, the kids that would carry on would then show the new kids coming in, like, here's how things work, like, you're new here, let me show you around, so
and for listeners to get perspective, GNFC was the first school in India that in the early 80s, maybe like 1984, 1985, the first kind of the India school program was established, and that school was called GNFC. And then there's been a series of schools. So that's what Dharam's referring to, that the early 80s kind of paved the way for a culture within the school to be established that was very, very different in form and function than, so say, the Kundalini yoga community back in America.
Yeah. And I saw changes in the school happen, as I described, like, like they wouldn't let us beat up the juniors anymore, but then that sort of became the norm, and so as time went on, like when I was in my high school years, like I'm still causing a lot of trouble, but I think mainly when I got into like 11th and 12th grade, the nature of the school sort of shifted towards like the kids there sort of got excited about doing yoga. They were sort of like more into the program. They stopped punishing kids so harshly. There was more of like a cooperative, like the students and staff are working together to create a good experience for everyone. And I remember 11th and 12th grade, just like basically getting addicted to like doing new meditations. And, there was sort of a positive experience tied into that. And, by the time I graduated, I felt like on top of the world. It was like, I'm going to save the world with Kundalini yoga. And, I know everything. I don't need college or whatever. So I was a bit like brainwashed and sort of like propped up to be like the savior of humanity. But but the experience coming out of that was probably a lot more positive than kids who were graduating many years before I was. And of
Because of
course,
a shift of the ethos towards like
yeah,
meditation, kind of like creating a
totally,
new culture among the kids and the adults, so to speak,
yeah,
attempt
totally.
at it.
Yeah. And then, of course, I come back to the US and fall flat on my face because I'm an idiot 18-year-old who has no idea how the world works. Um, but like, at least I sort of had some maybe positive outlook coming out of it, which is something. Um, yeah. And I sort of just like found my way, slowly over time. Just sort of unwinding things that I was taught that I didn't feel served me, and learning to sort of balance myself, uh, and not really buying in so much to the like we're saving the world sort of mentality.
Let's pause there for a second, because I think this is a really significant thing to understand for those of us that were born into this culture. The depth of the, for lack of a better word, implementation in us around, we're here to change humanity.
Right.
That is so much a part of our upbringing, and you're mentioning it as a significant point in your school in India, where that kind of became more of like the focus, and like you really got more into Kundalini yoga. And then that becomes like, this is the technology that we're going to change humanity with. And that came so early, and it's almost like it was a part of, like, those of us born in, it's a part of our responsibility as souls to
Right.
take this for, like, that's a heavy burden to bear,
Right.
to change the world, right? Or humanity.
Right.
So talk a little bit about like having that sense, like getting that real strong and kind of conviction, like, I have the thing that's going to change the world, and then how you kind of got into the awareness, like, maybe I'm not here
Yeah.
to change humanity.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, I had been fed that line by my dad and my parents and sort of aunties and uncles in 3HO since I was a child, you
Me
know.
too.
Uh, and Yogi Bhajan had said when my mom was pregnant, he was like, yeah, he used to be a spiritual teacher and he had 300,000 students or something. And it was all this hype, about what I was going to be and what I was going to do. And then, we'd have Kundalini yoga, like teacher trainers come to the school, like guest teachers would come to MPA, and they would teach yoga class. And in the class, they get up on the podium and they speak, like Yogi Bhajan about the dark age, now this is the Aquarian age and you're going to save everyone. And, why Kundalini yoga is so important, and sort of prop us up in that way. And some teachers would come and be like, okay, I'm going to teach you how to see auras now. It's just like, you tell a kid that, and they, like, I kind of believed it a little bit, like, I was like, okay, he's probably full of shit, but like, what if he's right? Like, I was like, wow, really? We're going to learn to see auras now? So cool. We didn't. Yeah. So like, I think, coming to the US and having that mentality, it was like, okay, I got to go out and teach yoga and sort of like build that strength, build that muscle of teaching. And I did a little bit, I like tried to get out there and teach a little bit. And it's just like constantly exhausted and just like, just not into it at all. And, I would sort of like be really gung ho and just like, oh, I'm going to teach yoga and do sadhana and all this stuff. And then I would sort of like hit a wall and just be like, fuck it all. I'm just going to play video games and like, eat nachos and like not going to do anything productive or good for myself or good for humanity. And I would sort of waffle between that. There was almost like a manic depressive pattern there. And I think just over time, like exposing myself to different things, I think really like relationships, like being intimate with women really helped me I don't know, connect with a different side of myself and try to like understand who I am and what my needs are, and and yeah, like try to erase some of the guilt around sexuality and relationships. And oh man, I mean, you could do a whole episode on that. Like the amount of shit we were taught that was just, I mean, just untrue and just awful to teach a child about sexuality.
Like the absolute untruth, the opposite of truths, the opposite
Yes.
of how to relate to our own bodies, how to relate to the opposite sex. I remember being in my mid 20s or 30s and thinking, God, how is it we learned about Kundalini as an energy, right? One of the most potent sexual life force energies existent in us, and zero actual real ways of relating and dealing with sexuality with another human being.
Right.
I was like, how is this possible? How can we have grown up with such potency on one end and then such complete lack of anything in the same context? And it started to string together like, wow, we got some convoluted mixed messages that
Mhm.
actually creates a disconnect inside of me, not a connect. And we've been trained, this is what real connection is. And I had to, at one point, realize this isn't real at all. This is actually fabricated
Right.
sense of connectivity, sense of compassion, sense of community, even. Because what is community if you don't feel safe amongst each other?
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I could go on for a long time about all the things that I've discovered to be untrue about sexuality and how harmful it's been in my life to have those things in my mind. And I, even in this last year, somebody said something and I was like, wait, that's science. That's not Kundalini yoga like theory about sexuality, right? I literally Googled it. I was like, no way. Until that moment, I had
Mm.
thought that was a scientific thing. I'm 34. Like, oh my God. It's
Yes,
crazy.
you're really bringing up an important point. I want to say that you brought up being um, sexually violated very young.
Mhm.
I'm assuming that there were more people in among our peers or young people that also were sexually violated. So there was physical abuse and more sexual abuse, and probably just hasn't been talked about a lot.
Yeah, I believe so. I consider myself fortunate and lucky that my situation was brought into the public sphere and known at least by all the other students.
Mm-hmm.
There was probably others where it wasn't.
Yeah, and I want to point out that there have been other stories that have come forward of the earlier years and some of the earlier schools where there had been sexual predation and other, just a culture of unsafety
Mhm.
that kind of paved the road for your years and the later years.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, it was not the best way to cultivate safety.
And I think now the stories that are coming out too is that even in our back home in our ashrams in our communities, we learned really young it wasn't safe to speak out loud, to share. There was no, we couldn't share with our parents. Like there was no private place, right? Because if you shared, before you know it, Yogi Bhajan knows, and then you're being called in. And so there was this culture of just don't say anything because it's
Yeah,
better than getting called in, right?
right. Yeah, and people thought he could read minds. I mean, my dad to this day, you know, is very adamant that Yogi Bhajan read his mind so many times. It's like I would have a dream and then Yogi Bhajan would call me and tell me about my dream or something. I'm like, all right,
Good.
not helpful, but fine, I'll leave that to your experience. Like I can't deny that happened, but yeah.
So Dharam, help us have perspective. Obviously, you're describing you came back from India and you started, started in one way and started waking up and kind of getting a hold of yourself in different ways.
Mhm.
Obviously, this year has been a explosive opening, and so give us some perspective on like what happened, because I read your mom's book, and I got the lens into the fact that, wow, it was just this year that, like, as a ton of bricks, it was like, gosh, what my mom told me years ago was actually true, and now I can actually believe her. So tell us a little bit about that, because I got that fully. My mom had left the Dharma early, and there's just a gravity of like, whoa, I can believe this story that seemed way too out there before, and suddenly it's like, and this is, so go ahead with that.
Yeah, I mean, I had been in touch with my birth mom, Wahe, my entire life. I used to visit her in the summers. She was living in LA, so I would come out to LA for a few weeks and visit with her. And as an adult, we would chat on the phone every couple months or something. And if we were ever in the same area, we would meet up and have breakfast or lunch or something. And we'd usually talk about the past and memories and how things, have played out in our relationship. And there's definitely, there were a few times where we sort of had friction between us, where I think mainly I would sort of be like get really angry or upset with her and just cut off the relationship for a year or something. It's happened at least twice. And before this year, I had actually done that. I had sort of been like, okay, I don't want to relate to you for a while. Like, I need some space. And part of that was this feeling of like inauthenticity on her. Like, I was like, I don't feel like you're engaging as a mom, like, keep talking about wanting to have a relationship to me as your son, but like, you're sort of maintaining this distance that's hard for me. And we got into some things. Like, I told her some things that I had sort of never had the courage to ask before. And we got into a bit of the past. I asked about the affair, and I asked about, what her experience was. I was very angry. I was like, you probably didn't give a shit. Like, you just walked away from me. Like, so you probably just wanted out of the whole situation. And she was very adamant, like, don't tell me what I felt. Like, I was devastated. Like, I wanted nothing more than to come back to you. It was like, we really got pretty raw with each other. And I feel like that was helpful. But yeah, this year, I think in January, my dad was the one that actually told me about Pamela Dyson's book. And he was like, oh, there's this poisonous book out. And really my first response was, oh, so you mean I should read it? And I literally ordered a copy like 10 minutes later on my phone. I was like, thanks, Dad. It kind of backfired. And I read it in a day, and I was just like, yeah, this all rings pretty true. Like, I sort of had always assumed he was having sex with secretaries. There was like all this stuff out there with, with like Premka and just sort of like, I don't know, it's like I could see it, and I sort of was like, maybe my mom was a part of that, maybe she wasn't. But in my mind, I'm just like, okay, it's something that's sort of like, you can't say is okay publicly, but like, it's consensual and is like, it's none of my business, but it's kind of messed up, but like, I'm not really going to do anything about it. And yeah, at that point, like, the only person that I sort of had a record of saying that was Premka with her lawsuit. Because I would go online and read your Sot's website and, read the
Wacky World.
Yeah, Kamala's website. And I would sort of read those things because I was curious, even when I was 18. And I was like gung-ho, like 3HO. I was like, there's nothing out there that exposing myself to it will make me a worse person. Like, I'm not afraid of information. Like, I want information. If something is out there that I'm afraid of, I'm going to go read it so that I understand what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I was always sort of curious about things, but I also always took it as like, oh, these people are angry and hurt and betrayed, and I don't feel that way. So like, I don't really know what I can believe about what they're saying. But Pamela's book was just perfect because it was just like, here's my experience. It was just like, here's how I experienced it in that moment with no like backwards looking judgment. And I was like, I don't see anything in this book that I can really shed like doubt on. It's like everything about this book rings true. It's not like, you know, yeah, it's like I don't see anything with this book that doesn't ring true to me. And I think that was a lot of people's responses. And then I think, you know, I reached out to my mom. I was like, hey, have you read her book? She's like, yeah, I heard about it, you know, and she's like, I think she said she had already read it. And we sort of got to talking about things. And then she just like drops very slyly, like, yeah, I have a similar story in my book. And I was like, your book? I was like, excuse me? And she's like, yeah, I wrote a book, you know, 15 years ago or something. And it was typed up, but I was afraid that if I showed it to you, you would just like shun me. And traditionally, you know, my dad would shun her. And she was just afraid to put it out there, basically, afraid of the consequences. And I think she had the courage to mention it to me. And then I was like, yeah, please send it to me. You know, I'm very eager to read it. Like, what can I do to help? Like, I'll pay for shipping. Like, I'll pay for transcribing. I don't care. Like, I want your story. It's really important to me. And she and a friend of hers like typed it up because it was like from a typewriter, you know, like that's how old it was.
Right.
They like typed it into a Google Doc, and they would sort of type like a few pages at a time, and then I would have the Google Doc and I would be reading like a few pages at a time. So I'm like getting this story live as it's being transcribed. It's like every day I'd be like, oh, like I want to log in and check, but I don't want to be disappointed. Like, I don't know if there's more pages or not. And yeah, I mean, when I finished the story, I was just like, wow. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy what these people went through, what my mom went through. And I think even after reading her book, I wasn't like, it definitely brought a lot of closure and helped me understand, but I wasn't like livid. I wasn't like Yogi Bhajan, this motherfucker, you know, like it wasn't like that. I got to that point when I heard some other stories of like kids who went to GNFC and GRD, came back to the US and were literally just preyed upon by him and his secretaries. And I was just like, this is so fucked up. Like, this is not okay. This is not in their best interest at all. There's no way you can justify this. This is just him being a creepy motherfucker, you know, and just preying on innocent people, innocent children, and for his own desires. And I'm just like, fuck him, you know?
Yeah.
I'm like, you know, and maybe he did some good things in his life. I mean, he, you know, created this community that brought me this sense of family and bonding with these friends that I have that I went to school with in India with. And I'm so grateful I have that support system, you know? So like, you know, I'm grateful for the things that he did that created the life that I have. But what a motherfucker.
Yeah.
Do that to innocent kids. I mean, just the lack of moral compass and self-control. And it's just like, there's no way I can respect him as a saint or, you know, it's like venerate him in some way. It's like, hell no, that is not okay. You know, regardless of the good things you've done in life, not okay. Nobody deserves respect after that. You know, he fucked up big time.
Yeah, the sadistic level of psychosomatic disconnection that got instilled in us, but also specifically on the women that got groomed and preyed upon. And then
Yeah.
we're like the aftermath of that in a way,
Yeah.
you know, like we're getting taught one thing, right? And I want to go back to the point where as a child, you're growing up, you assumed, yeah, I mean, I assume he's sleeping with his secretaries. I mean, like that was an assumption of mine as a child too, but to actually witness it, like the level of grooming and predation in terms of the psychological, spiritual, and sexual predator tools used to give up agency and to like remove a sense of like what self is, that really rang true when I read your mom's story. And
Totally. Yeah.
she was so strong. And, you know, again, her story is hers, but I want to point this out because um, you're 34 when you're
Right.
calling her, and suddenly it's like, whoa, everything that you've ever told me now I see as true.
Mhm.
Whoa.
Right. Yeah. I think it was after I read some of the India kids stories in the second gen group, Facebook
Yeah.
group. I think that's when I sent that email to her where I was like, you were right. This guy's was a sick sexual predator. It wasn't actually her book that made me feel that way. It was reading the stories of people I know who I respect and care about in our community describing how he treated them. That just it just it's different, you know? Like if you get yourself into a situation as an adult, it's like you have some responsibility there, you know? Like my parents, sure, they were manipulated in ways by him, but they sought out this community, you know? They got themselves into this situation and to a certain extent. We didn't choose. We if you take a child who was raised in 3HO and put him in the hands of the leader of that community for him to manipulate and destroy their innocence and say that they're going to be a hooker, you know, that's that just yeah, it gets every fiber of my being with injustice. I'm just like, it's not okay on any level, you know, to respect someone who's done that.
Yeah, and what rings so true for me as children growing up in it is like we don't know any different. This is our normal. So reading about high demand groups, or kind of like what are the ingredients of a high demand group, also known as a cult, what are the ingredients that, like, what happens to the generation born next.
Yeah.
And when you're marinated in something, you don't have a before to compare it to.
Mhm.
We just are,
Yeah.
and this is all we know. And so I didn't go to India, but listening to India kids,
Mhm.
my peers and younger in your generation, my body was like, I go through that too.
Right.
Me too. It's like I shared so much of, say, complex relationship with food, or emotional disconnection, or not knowing how to like ask for help, or just certain aspects that I suddenly was seeing myself in you. And I
Yeah.
didn't go to India and I didn't have certain abuses, which then told me this was the ethos of our whole upbringing. It's not just the experience in India. It wasn't just
Right.
a unique experience. It was the culture of don't talk about it.
Right.
If it doesn't feel good, elevate, keep yourself right. This unconscious, it's up to
Right.
you and there's nobody there for you. Go meditate.
Right. Yeah. It's crazy. Yeah. Um, I mean, it gets me excited for how I'm going to raise, you know, our son that's on the way. You know, like, you know, he's going to have two loving parents that are going to be present and try to create a safe environment for him to thrive and feel joy and innocence. And you know, I want to make sure he gets things like grit, you know, and sort of has all the tools he needs to succeed. But he's certainly not going to go, you know, into situations that will rob him of his innocence and you know really sort of break him down in ways, you know. And I'm excited for his future, for his life.
Me too. You know, the amount of work you've done on yourself and the healing that you're courageously stepping into within yourself, within your own family legacy. Give us some perspective. Your mom left in what year? Your birth mom, rather?
So she left our family in '89 to go live with Yogi Bhajan. She sort of like broke off from Yogi Bhajan around 91, I think, 92 maybe. But then she was around in the community for several years, and had another kid actually in 3HO. So I have a half sister who's 9 years younger than I am. So she was born in 94. So, my mom didn't really leave 3HO. She just sort of like slowly phased out,
I really respected that about her story was, just, it's a whole nother ball game of the playing, the level of excellence that she played at.
Yeah.
And like what you're saying, she never quote left, but kind of slowly transitioned and rebuilt her esteem and her sense of life, and became a prominent musician that carried on a whole new life. I'm bringing it up more to give the listeners perspective that it was only this year, like even though you had an established relationship, it was kind of rocky because you had different stories going on, right? You were told the story of why of what other people said, and then her story. Right. And it was only this year that these kind of like really came together for you to get a new lens of what all of this meant.
Yeah. And I mean, in so many ways, her book sort of just put that all together for me. It's like, okay, now I have her actual story, not, a few descriptive words. Now
for those of you that don't know, Dharam's mom, his birth mom, was one of the women directly abused by Yogi Bhajan.
Yeah. So that was from 89 to 92-ish, 91, 92, she was living with Yogi Bhajan as his personal attendant. Yeah, I think the book has only been shared like sort of personally between people and then in the second gen Facebook group. And I think she intends to share it with a wider audience, but I think she shared with me that she wanted the second gen to read it first and have space to process it amongst themselves before opening it up to anybody else to read it. So I'm not sure her timing of when she wants to sort of open it up to a more public sphere. But yeah, I guess I should say, in my introduction, I wrote that this year has sort of allowed me to be more authentic. I think for at least 10 years, I've felt this sort of dichotomy between, okay, when I'm in Espanola and when I go to Gurdwara, I'm in like full Bana, and I totally look the part of like the Pakka Sikh, I'm doing kirtan, and I really love wearing Bana. I feel good in Bana. I feel like proud and regal and beautiful. I love the tradition. I respect it. I love playing kirtan. I still play kirtan now. But then, in my personal life, it's like, I, don't see a problem with having a drink. It's like, I'm not like getting shit faced, but like, I'm going to have a beer, with a friend, or, eating eggs. I guess that's not really a Sikh thing, but,
in our culture it was, though.
Our culture was, for sure. Yeah. And then, before I married Wahe Guru, before we were together, it was like the no sex out of marriage thing, like I was baptized as a Sikh when I was 18. So I took those commitments seriously. And over the years sort of realized like, okay, being a baptized Sikh, committing to these things doesn't work for me. Like I need space to explore myself and what works for me. And so I sort of let those things go. But then I would still show up, and look the part in Gurdwara. And it's like, I kind of didn't like that people were assuming I'm this Pakka Sikh, sort of feeding off that positivity. It felt disgenuine,
Yeah.
And, in many ways this year was like, okay, I think I'm ready to like set that aside, the like looking the part and sort of allowing people to assume things about me. It's like, okay, I'm going to shave my head.
Tell us about that. What was it like to shave your head? This is the first time you'd ever cut your hair.
Yeah, it was scary. Honestly, I had nightmares the night before of my dad and a friend Sabon like dragging me out of bed and sort of like tying me up so I wouldn't do it. I honestly like I was afraid, and
That's real.
I was breathing hard. I had like Pringles in my shoulders. I was like trembling a little bit, when I was doing it. And luckily I had the support of, our friends in Portland. Like even with COVID going on, we just sort of got together and they all sort of helped me do it. We did like 5 little braids, and um, a friend of ours who's a photographer took some really great photos of the whole process. And so it was actually like really beautiful experience. I wrote like a little poem that I recited before we started, and just sort of approached it as like a really sort of spiritual transformation, very conscientious. And I don't know, it felt right for me to do it that way. I had probably spent like 2 or 3 months talking to anyone who I thought would give me advice that would be useful before deciding what to do. And I really wanted to make sure I wasn't going to regret it, even though, it's just hair, it grows back, but with the way we were raised,
It is not just hair. That is some serious.
With all our hair to the last breath, this false idea is like, I don't know, okay. So I asked my parents this question probably like 12 years ago. I was like, so if a friend of mine wanted to either cut his hair or rob a bank at gunpoint, was like, and I was to counsel him which one he should do, which one is better. And they were like, well, cutting your hair has serious consequences. I was like, you're kidding, right? I was like, this was supposed to be a joke question. Like, the answer is easy. Like, somebody cuts their hair, they go on living their life, everything is fine. They rob a bank at gunpoint, they're going to jail. Like, they've totally destroyed their family. Like, they're gonna suffer for years. And they were like, no, like your hair is your identity, it's your soul, it's your commitment. And what do you have if you don't have that? I was like, wow. Like,
wow.
We are not on the same page here. Like, this is very different for you. And that just has constantly highlighted the difference for me between someone like me who kept their hair and wore a turban because I loved it. I loved how I felt,
Mm-hmm.
And them who do it for a different reason, I think, and see it in a different way. And I feel like that way it can be harmful, especially when it's applied to other people in a form of judgment.
Sure.
And so in many ways, like me cutting my hair was a sort of public statement against that dogmatic, mentality about hair. It's like, what does it matter if I have my hair? What does it matter if I'm bald? Like, it sort of challenges people's perception of like, you can't be a Sikh without having your hair or a turban. It's like, I'm a Sikh, man.
Mm-hmm.
Try to tell me I'm not. Like,
it's not up to you to decide if I'm. That's about my relationship directly to the Guru.
I have a relationship with Bonnie and with Kirtan and with, my experiences, like, growing up around the Golden Temple. And it's like, you can't tell me I'm not a Sikh. Like, and like, honestly, I kind of, I'm still playing with the idea of like, maybe I'll grow my hair back and put on a turban again. Like, I don't really know what I'm going to do. And I want it to be not important to people, and so long as it's important, especially to my dad, unfortunately, as long as it's important to him, I'm going to continue to sort of be in a place of like, I can't put my turban on again and have it be authentic because I can't trust that I'm not doing it in part to please him.
Yes. On that note, your dad and your stepmom are still very much in the community and on the side of the stark denier side, correct?
Yeah, and he's on the SSSC board now, even though he placed dead last in the election because they had so many resignations that he got placed on the board. And yeah, it's been a challenge. Like, we've definitely fought with him more in 2020 than I ever have in my life. We've exchanged some heated words, and I've said some things that I probably, regret, and he's said some things that I hope he regrets because they were cruel. But somehow we've managed to sort of maintain a relationship, and I still talk to him every week or every few weeks. And I think we kind of avoid the topic, but if it comes up, we'll get into it, and I think we've sort of learned to try to respect certain boundaries, like if he says something that's particularly hurtful, that gets like a visceral reaction from me, I'm like, don't say that, like, that's not okay. And he will actually be like, okay, I hear you. I mean, I'm grateful that we're able to sort of continue to try to hash things out and maintain a relationship, because I love him. I want him in my life. He's been there for me, and shown me a lot of love and support in so many ways.
It's got to be a whole different kind of compassion that you have to hold when your parents are on the inside of this and haven't changed their stance as you see so much more and register so much more and let the puzzle pieces fit together, and you have family members that don't do that in the light of everything that's come forth.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think my wife's reading a book, I forget what it's called, but somewhere in there it was saying that like compassion comes somewhat from acceptance, that I guess in some ways I just accept that their experience is different, and that, I can understand how important it is to them. I mean, for my dad, I mean, if you can imagine what it would take for him to accept that Yogi Bhajan was manipulating him, like, there's so much, like, it's easy for me or you to say that, but for him to accept that, that means he's taking responsibility for all the decisions along the way where he said, I'm going to trust Yogi Bhajan with what he's telling me right now. And to go back and question all of those decisions that he made along the way and look at how his life might have been different if he hadn't made those mistakes. That's a lot, you know, like, for me or you, it may be like ripping off a branch from the tree. For him, it's like you're digging out the whole root ball of the tree. Like, there's this, like, it's a really deep thing. And, I kind of don't think it'll ever happen. I kind of hope, I'm holding out hope a little bit, but if it does happen, it's going to be like 10 years from now. Like, to be able to look at oneself that way and like evaluate all of the different points in your life where your trajectory changed because you decided to trust someone, it's hard. It's a lot.
Yeah. And to add to that, I think that like you and I, from a young age, we were seeing cracks the whole time, because as children, seeing things differently, you're not, and so I think a lot of young people that grew up kind of assumed, well, yeah, that's happening, yeah, he's sleeping with secretaries, but we didn't assume it was sadistic mutilation and abuse. We assumed it was consensual, for lack of a better word, even though in a teacher-student relationship, there's never consent.
Right.
You still assume it's that, like people know what they're getting into when they end up there, but you don't understand the level of actual grooming and kind of actual manipulation taking place.
Right.
And so like by 15, I remember kind of drifting away from the community because I saw hypocrisy, because I saw incongruency. It didn't mean I didn't love my community still. If anything, that's what kept me, was the love and the relationships, and the sense like, wow, I can go anywhere in the world and have this sense of family.
Right.
But I still saw all the holes. I remember getting the idea to cut my hair for the first time. I'm 27.
Wow.
And the thing I wanted to bring up, because it was so similar to yours, is all I could feel was fear. It
Yeah.
was so much fear. And I was like, oh my God, like, even if this is the most amazing spiritual teaching on the planet,
Mhm.
that this is the electromagnetics of my being, and it's the antenna, and even if this is the ultimate truth, it can never be this good to hold this much fear.
Right.
And it can't be the only truth because there's monks that are bald and they must be connected to God too. I remember thinking these things and leaning in to say, no matter what, dissipating this fear has got to be good.
Right.
And I did it as a way to be like, I have to break the indoctrination of fear.
Mhm.
Even if I love this teaching and want to do it for the rest of my life, I want to do it because I've decided to do it, not because I'm not doing it because I'm afraid of what others say.
Yeah, 100%. I feel the same way.
And so
Yeah.
your choice to grow it back or your choice to wear a turban, like to have this be inspired from this wellspring inside to say, I do this because my soul is vibrating this desire,
Yeah.
as opposed to I've been told this is the right way. And who would I be if I don't do this?
Yeah. And actually, somewhat my experience of doing Seva at the Golden Temple helped me with this process because they, the people that do Seva clean the marble every morning at like 2 or 3 a.m. They don't, it doesn't matter. It's kind of like longer. It's like everybody's the same there, and the people who get respect there are not the ones with the most beautiful turban. It's the folks that show up every single day. You never see them not there. When they're not there, you're like, whoa, that's weird, you know? And it's just like a bald guy in like a white patani suit, and I don't even know his name, but like he's chanting, he's always doing his seva and it's beautiful. And I have so much respect for him. And it's like, okay, like, I can be a part of this. I can do the things that I love, around the Guru and Seva and Kirtan and Langar. I can do those things, and it doesn't matter, this sort of fear around whether my hair is there or not. And that actually really helped me sort of envision myself as like sort of envisioning myself like going to a Gurdwara and playing Kirtan with just a head cover, and doing Seva with a head cover and being like, okay, I'm coming from a place of humility instead of a place of pride, And I was like, I want that experience. I want to feel that, you know? And so,
You're not going to be looked down on the Sangit if your turban isn't perfect or looking at, and how much we grew up with the external perception around what our bana had to look like or what our practice had to look like. And that's so much of our upbringing too, is the perfect sadhana, the perfect that, and a lot of adults talk about kind of this permeating judgment of, are you doing your banis? Are you doing your sadhana? Are you dressed right? Is everything looking okay?
mhm, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you. This has
Yeah.
just been very illuminating, and we've covered a lot. Um, I want to move into the song you've chosen for today.
Okay.
You want to
Awesome.
give us some perspective, or do you want to
Yeah.
intro it a little bit before we go there?
Yeah, so this song was given to me by the therapist that I worked with in Seattle. She gave it to me right before I moved to Portland, so the summer of 2019. I had been doing therapy with her for 2 years in Seattle. And I mean, that work was just huge. I mean, the difference that I saw in my sort of symptoms of depression, PTSD, I was able to sleep better. I was able to manage, uh, like learn to have more healthy relationship to like video games and, um, my relationship with Wahe Guru, my wife, like really improved. I mean, there was just so much that I felt like our work together, like sort of produced. And as I was preparing to like go to Portland, and that means that her and I wouldn't be working together anymore. She said she found a song that made her think of my experience and sort of what I had been through. And the song really made me feel seen, in a way that was really meaningful. Um, and I think it's relatable in the sense for so many people that have been through a lot as children, and how it affects you and how it sort of transform you as you become an adult. And hopefully that it transforms you in a way that makes you sort of want to help people rather than hurt them. So anyway,
Yeah.
that's it.
Thank you. We're going to listen to this fully so we can get the full effect here. This is Atlas 8.
Was like a switch was flipped. Was just a kid who grew up strong enough to pick this armor up and suddenly it fit. God, that was so long ago, long ago, long ago. I was little, I was weak and perfectly naive, and I grew up too quick. Now you won't see all that I had to lose and all I've lost in the fight to protect it. I won't let you in, I swore never again. I can't afford, no, I refuse to be rejected. I wanna break these bones till they're better. I wanna break them right and feel alive. You were wrong, you were wrong, you were wrong. My healing needed more than time. When I see fragile things, helpless things, broken things, I see the familiar. I was little, I was weak, I was perfect too. Now I'm a broken mirror, but I can't let you see all that I have to lose, all I've lost in the fight to protect it. I can't let you in, I swore never again. I can't afford to let myself be blindsided. I'm standing guard, I'm falling apart, and all I want is to trust you. Show me how to lay my sword down for long enough to let you through. Here I am, prod me open. What do you want to know? I'm just a kid who grew up scared enough to hold the door shut and buried my innocence. But here's a map, here's a shovel, here's my Achilles heel. I'm all in, palms out, I'm at your mercy now, and I'm ready to begin. I am strong, I am strong, I am strong enough to let you in. I'll shake the ground with all my might, and I will pull my whole heart up to the surface. For the innocent, for the vulnerable, and I'll show up on the front lines with a purpose. And I'll give all I have, I'll give my blood, give my sweat. An ocean of tears will spill for what is broken. I'm shattered porcelain, glued back together again. Invincible, like I've never been.
Whoa, that really brought me to tears.
Yeah, gets me every time.
The being strong enough to let you in
Yeah.
It really rings true, because I've learned that one of the unconscious conditionings that we got as kids of this Dharma is to not feel and to not know how to ask for support, not know how to let people in.
Right.
Because we were trained in resilience and strength.
Right.
And to an extent that we blocked out support because we learned so early there was none.
Yeah.
That's complex trauma, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, the song is basically about vulnerability and how hard it is to do when you were traumatized as a kid or learned that it wasn't safe to go to an adult for help. And trying to trust a therapist as an adult to hold you, to hold your pain, your inner child, to hold your needs, and to make yourself vulnerable to that process. It's really fucking hard. and it feels amazing when that therapist can meet you there and hold you. It makes such a difference. But it's really scary, you know?
Totally. And whether that's a therapist or whether that's your partner or a friend, whoever it is that we learn that we're safe enough to let in. Over the years, as I was teaching Kundalini yoga, say from 2012 to 2015, 16, yoga students, I was a little repulsed by the marketing tactics of what I was witnessing. It was the first time I was back in the community, and I started just feeling like there was a marketing funnel into Sikhism, and feeling like, why do they still sell this as a way into a religion? I just didn't understand it. And then yoga students would come and just be like, it must be so amazing to grow up like you must have been enlightened by 8. And I'm thinking, fuck, if this is enlightenment, I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah, totally. Oh man.
But I say that to say we got the ethos of keep up, we got the ethos of be strong, and one of the things that I've always gotten is, gosh, you're so strong. Right. And I feel like so many of us that grew up in our Dharma, we have this perfected projection of regal strength and pride of who we are. Yeah. And yet deep inside this depth of not knowing how to expose what's inside of us.
Yeah, there was I didn't know how afraid I was of the word weakness. Oof. It's incredible. And the fact that there are people who don't fear weakness the way that I do is just mind blowing to me. And it's I want that, I want to be able to be weak sometimes and to not have a mortal fear of it,
Yeah. For me, that showed up as softness.
Yeah, nice.
Letting my feminine softness out, and my body, my muscles were overdeveloped, almost as an armor. My back flexors and my core muscles overdeveloped as this sense of protection against this little soft little girl inside that had never been nurtured.
Mm. Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Thank you for that song. Thank you for sharing your story and giving us a glimpse into your experience and growing up here. And what's now? Tell us about where you're at now. You're obviously about to have a baby with your wife.
Yeah, I am so grateful for the life that we have. We moved to Portland last year, and there's maybe at least 4 or 5 couples in Portland around our age who went to school in India who we're super close to, and they're all about to have kids or just had a kid. So the idea of our kids growing up together and sort of us just having each other to hang out with. Obviously with COVID, can't really do that much hanging out, but in normal times, we will be able to. And yeah, we bought a house this past summer here. Wahe Guru just finished her first year of residency for naturopathic medicine. So, you know, her medical career is sort of underway. And yeah, my work, I mean, I just work on the computer from home. Been doing that for like 5 years. And Postmates is owned by Uber now, so I guess I work for Uber. But yeah, I mean, doing programming work has allowed us to sort of not really worry too much about money and finances, and has allowed us to be generous with donating to charities and stuff. And that's been really nice to be like sort of financially independent and healthy. And yeah, I mean, yeah, we're going to be parents. I really appreciate having cats. I feel like it's kept my sanity through the years. They're just amazing creatures, and they like constantly they make me smile really big and laugh every day. Like, I'm just so happy when I'm interacting with them. So that's like awesome.
Well, I want to thank you for your voice. As you know, a child of our Dharma and speaking out at this time, and everything that you've gone through, and the complexity of what you've gone through, you know, the multi-layers. I think of the story in your mom's book of when you're 4 saying, I know you all aren't telling me the truth. What's really going on? You know, at 4, like,
yeah.
And that's still coming forth, that your soul's voice is coming forth to say, my community matters, the people I was raised with matter, my brothers and sister matter, this community is mine.
Yeah.
I'm not letting it be taken away no matter what. I just think that's such an important stance as kids of our own Dharma, that this is our community. We built this. This is where we're from. And we get to recreate it by putting truth into it.
Yeah, thank you for seeing that. Nice.
Yeah, and you stand for that, and even your actions are showing that so much. And I just really appreciate the strength that it takes to share such vulnerably, and to share parts of the story that I'm sure you're still reconciling,
Yeah.
and piecing and figuring it all out. And that's so much about what our stories are about. Is it's not that we got any of this figured out. It's that we're giving a glimpse into the interior of what it means to realize that what we thought we had is very much more complex and convoluted. And together we get to unwind it and rename it and recreate it.
Totally.
Yeah. Thank you. Anything else you want to leave with the listeners, either of our peers or any other nature?
No. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to all our listeners. Again, this is the Uncomfortable Conversations podcast, the untold stories of the 3HO Kundalini Yoga community. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Thank you to our guest, Dharam Khalsa Lietz.
Thanks, Kundalini.
Thank you.